I'm Michael, and this is Carelifornia. And combing through the new Republican stimulus package proposal, known as the HEREOS Act, it turns out there are quite a few things in there that don't really seem to help anybody who's actually in need of help. Sure, you could say that large corporations and the top 1% of wealthy people will definitely benefit from some of these provisions, but it isn't really clear why they would include so many of these types of provisions in this proposed bill if they're actually trying to help Americans who are suffering as a result of the lockdown and the pandemic. So today I'm going to go over some of the sweetheart deal provisions, or provisions that just don't really seem to make much sense or were not really that well thought out, that are included in the Republican HEREOS Act. Now this is your 5-minute daily dose. So let's make this quick. But before we do that, if you like this information, if you find it interesting, if you find it helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way you can get updates when our newest and most informative videos become available. One of the strangest juxtapositions in the HEREOS Act proposal is how it deals differently with food resources for wealthy people versus poor people. So for example, in the HEREOS Act proposal, there is a provision that will allow businesses to write off 100% of the cost of what they eat at a restaurant while they are talking business. Senator Tim Scott, a Republican from South Carolina, offered this provision in the proposal, which moves the existing deduction up from 50% to 100%. Now, what is striking about all of this is that there's no mention in any of the rest of the HEREOS Act of increased funding for any food assistance programs like SNAP, WIC, PEBT, or food stamps. So essentially, what would happen is that wealthy people and corporations will be able to write off 100% of their meals and potentially save hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in taxes. But under this proposal, American families who are struggling with increased costs of food and facing either unemployment or decreased income because of the pandemic are getting nothing to help them feed their families for the rest of the year. It is really astonishing how tone-deaf this proposal is to offer a provision on food that amounts to huge tax breaks to wealthy people, while people in need cannot get justifiable increases in their food benefits. My only hope is that the Republicans assume that Democrats are going to put food benefits into the final bill, so they don't have to put it in their own bill. But that might be more optimism than is justified by reality. Another portion of the proposal that doesn't seem to make much sense is the revised Paycheck Protection Program rules. The PPP is meant to help businesses who have been affected by the pandemic and the lockdown receive forgivable loans to help them pay for their employees and some of their overhead costs during the pandemic. In this new proposed version of the program, in order to apply for the assistance, businesses would have to show that their revenue is down by 50% during the pandemic. This is a portion that doesn't really seem to make much sense to me. Of course, it is important that there is assistance for small businesses during the pandemic. And of course, I myself, being a small business owner and during a pandemic, fully understand this. But what doesn't make sense is the need to show a 50% decrease in revenue. In most cases, for most businesses, especially those ones hit hardest like restaurants and retail businesses, the margins are generally pretty slim. And at this point in the year, nearly 8 months in, any restaurant who's been running at a 50% reduced revenue has already got 2 feet in the grave. Having the revenue requirement be so low makes the benefit essentially unusable, because any business who would qualify is already out of business or has already laid off all of its employees and is laying comatose until there's a clear and definite pathway to reopen permanently. So providing funding for employees that businesses don't have and they won't bring back until they can reopen won't really do much good. It would be much better to lower the necessary revenue to show maybe only 25% or 30% reduction in revenue, but anything more than that just doesn't really seem to make much sense. Now, at least the 2 previous provisions I talked about are related to the pandemic. The next thing that is a part of the HEREOS Act proposal is actually not. There is an inclusion for the proposal for $2 billion for the construction of a new FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. The reality of this provision actually making it to the end, the final bill, is probably next to zero, but it is ridiculous to see that something like a new headquarters for the FBI would be included in a bill that is supposed to help Americans during the lockdown and the pandemic. Having a new building would not help feed Americans, it would not help keep Americans healthier, and it wouldn't help stop the spread of the pandemic. So this one just seems like a Hail Mary from the White House. This is because even some of the top Republican lawmakers like Lindsey Graham, Rick Scott, or John Barrasso were dismayed at its inclusion and even struggle to see how it's appropriate to include non-pandemic funding like this in a pandemic assistance bill. Not to be outdone by the blatant exploitation of this bill's must-pass status, Senate Republicans are defending a provision in the HEREOS Act that would add $30 billion to the Pentagon's budget, including $8 billion for weapon systems, $1 billion for patrol planes, and billions more for military hardware. Again, this seems like an obvious money grab with no concern for the lives of the needs of people in our country. But there's no way that weapon systems, let alone $8 billion or $30 billion, would be appropriate in this bill. This has been your 5-minute daily dose, and I hope that you found it interesting or helpful or at least useful. And if you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, we here at Carelifornia, we know health insurance. So if you have any questions about your health insurance, leave those down below, and we'll be happy to make a new video or a new post as soon as we can. So other than that, I am Michael, and this is Carelifornia, wishing you a happy, healthy day.